Yeah. So why don't you just do the highest resolution you can and just call it good enough?
No, it's, wait, what? That's not what I want.
You aren't able, I don't think you're able to do anything about it. It's coming out of the level, so that's a good sign. Hey, everybody.
We've got 1 minute until we publish the videos, so get ready for Leap. All right, apologies for the slight delay, but the videos are now live on team1540.org/leap-kickoff. So go ahead and watch the link on YouTube or on Dropbox. They're the same thing. And then come on back to the Google Hangout, and then we can get started with the Q&A at 7:30. Apologies, the Q&A will start at 7:40. Neha, you said that you couldn't hear the audio. Can you hear it now? So in order to pass the time here, we are going to play Pictionary. So if you're on, post your guesses to the Q&A. Well, as it turns out, the white balance on this turns out to be such that you actually can't see what I'm drawing. So let's play charades. Okay, in case you missed it, we're playing charades. So if you have a guess as to what I'm doing, post it in the Q&A.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you all very much for joining us in our first iteration of LEAP. We're all really excited to see it kick off. My name is Iman Wall, and I'm a junior on Team 1540. The way this all started was a couple months ago. I started thinking about the different types of robotics projects we do throughout the year, and I really thought it would be great if we could find a way to facilitate robotics students in helping people in their community. Um, there's so much skill and sharp people in robotics, and I just thought it'd be amazing if we could apply these skills to things, to real world problems around us. So after a lot of brainstorming and talking to different people, we eventually put together LEAP, and we're really excited to be working with OMSI this year to be designing exhibit ideas for them. And so, yeah, thank you all very much for coming. And I'd now like to introduce Kevin Kearns, who is the VP of Exhibits at OMSI, and Dale Yoakum, who is our head mentor at Team 1540. Thank you.
Hey, gang. So I first of all wanted to thank Kevin for taking so much time out of his life to do this. This is a huge undertaking on top of an already huge job. And so thank you very much for doing that. There's a few rules we ought to go over before we delve into Q&A. But Kevin, do you have anything you want to say up front?
I mean, the big thing I want to say is thank you guys for signing up and taking on the challenge. And thank you guys from Catlin and Gable for kicking this whole thing off. It's super awesome. I really like this idea of figuring out how to engage a community in engaging with community. So that's this community of the first community is one that I knew up in Canada and engaged with well when I was up there, and I really loved what we did, but I like how you've taken it to the next level. So thank you, and thank you for inviting me to participate.
Okay, great. And in terms of asking questions, we have an odd time delay here. The Google Hangout on the air system delays us about 30 seconds to a minute. And so obviously audio questions aren't going to work out so well. So if you're watching this on Google Hangouts, which hopefully that's where you are, there's a little box up in the upper right that's got 9 squares in it. Click on that, and then one of the choices is going to be Q&A. And so that's where you type your questions. And Jacob over here is monitoring that Q&A system, and will relay those to us. Also, if that doesn't work for you for some reason, you can also send an email to robotics@catlin.edu, and Jacob's going to be monitoring that as well. On the LEAP kickoff page are links to the rules document, but there's it's probably worth us kind of going through some of these. So the idea is that you're trying to propose the most exciting, engaging exhibit that you can that will fit into all of OMSI's constraints. And OMSI, like any business, has size constraints and money constraints and so on. And so let's kind of go through some of these rules. Number 2 is exhibit size. OMSI would kind of really rather these were probably less than 50 square feet or so. But if you've got something that's absolutely astounding, amazing, and you think you can make a business case for why something bigger than that will just make OMSI into an even more awesome place, then you can still propose that. Just know that the bigger it is and the more expensive it is, the more of a case you're going to have to make as to why this is something that you think they ought to do. Consumables, there's a lot of visitors that come in and out of OMSI, and if the exhibits require them to use things, paper clips, paper cups, whatever it is, in order to get the experience that you're proposing, you just want to make sure that those consumables are less than 50 cents, and you'd probably really rather they were in the pennies rather than.
It's true, yeah, 50% per person, so per person who's going to engage.
Yeah. Autodesk has been terrific in terms of supporting this event, and CAD programs are something that they know quite a bit about, and they would like CAD to be part of the presentation that you make when you go to OMSI on Sunday. And so you need to have CADed something in either Fusion or Autodesk Inventor if you want to get the points for that part. And we'll kind of talk about the points here in a little bit. So what's going to happen then is the teams are all going to bring their projects to OMSI's auditorium on Sunday night, and the doors will open at 4 o'clock there. And by 5 o'clock, the judges, including Kevin here, will be roving around, asking you lots of questions. It's something like pit judging would be in FRC or like a science fair. It's not like you're going off to a separate place and making a formal presentation. It's more of a conversation, really, about your project. And there might be multiple groups of judges that'll be going around talking to you. They may not go around in one big lump. And you'll also be interacting with other teams and other visitors that just happen to be at OMSI and want to see what it is you're up to. And so the area that you have to set up your booth at OMSI is 100 square feet or less. And OMSI's been nice about providing tables. There's 6-foot tables and maybe 8-foot tables that would be available there that can be part of your booth, but anything else that you have, you want to bring yourselves. And you don't want to make these booths just crazy complicated. I know in FRC, we like to kind of go over the top in our booths, but the idea is you want to be able to set these things up in less than an hour and tear them down in less than half an hour. And really, less is more in this case. It's all about content, really, not about how flashy your booth is. OMSI would really prefer to have exhibits that don't require a person to be standing there interpreting the exhibit for the visitors. There happens to be a volunteer there, that's great, but you don't want to have an exhibit that requires somebody to be there monitoring it all the time. Judging is going to be done by OMSI employees and by Andy Sears from Autodesk. And I'll let you talk about who those people are that are going to be judging it.
Sure. So on our side is I've asked some of the folks that are part of the development of exhibits to participate. And got a couple of folks, a project manager, a design, one of my designers, and also one of the folks who works on programs that works on staffing these sorts of experiences. And 2 out of those 3 will be there with me, and
Okay.
maybe the 3rd.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. And in terms of judging, on the rules document, it'll talk about how this breakdown works, but about 30% of your overall score is the quality of your CAD and how well you're using CAD to do your presentation. About 25% is how innovative your exhibit is. About 25% is how engaging it is, how long it holds on to people and holds their attention. And about 20% is how practical it is. You know, obviously these are very subjective numbers, and the judges are gonna use their discretion as things kind of come and go. But the idea is that you want to have an exhibit that's engaging and that is practical and is somewhat innovative. So, so if you have any questions about the rules and that sort of thing, feel free to email me over the course of the weekend. I'm going to be here along with everyone else working on this stuff. And so that address is in the rules document. If you have questions about, gee, do you think OMSI would like this, or do you think OMSI would want to do that? I can't answer those. Kevin's not going to answer those. It's for you to make your own judgment in terms of how good a fit this is for OMSI. And so with that, I think we're open for questions.
So you might also want to share that they can come down and there's passes available.
Yeah. So on the LEAP website, you may have noticed that there's free passes available at OMSI. All you have to do is show up in your team shirt that has the team number on it. And if you're registered for LEAP, then the folks at the concierge desk will say, oh man, you get free tickets and you get to wander around. You know, you can wander around all of OMSI, obviously, but the Turbine Hall would be a good place to spend most of your time. So do we have any questions?
So there's a bit of a time delay on the webcast, so I'm not seeing any questions quite yet. Does anybody who's here have any questions? Bueller.
That's you guys.
Yeah.
When are you planning to have the entire exhibit?
Here, hold on a second. We're going to pass the mic over.
When are you planning to have the exhibit built?
Aha. So this first phase of the renovation, as I mentioned in the awesome video, was that the first phase is move. Our expectation is from our beginning, which we haven't yet begun. This is before we start. It takes about 18 months at a minimum to do the development. So our expectation is we're about 2 years, is a guess, from it being completed. And we're at that front end doing the research, which you guys are helping us do, which is what's cool, what are topics that are relevant, and what are some of the parameters that we want to give to ourselves about how to make these experiences. Does that answer?
Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you folks can look at when you're considering a new exhibit. What factors are important to you in terms of robustness and maintainability and that sort of thing?
Sure. But we consider tons of stuff, from safety to how well things will survive in this environment, which is the harshest environment that you can imagine. So that's actually one of those, that's a really important consideration. But I'll actually step back to sort of think a little bit more broadly about the kinds of experiences that we're trying to develop throughout this hall. And we're trying to move away from what probably a lot of you guys have seen and witnessed at OMSI, which there's a lot of stuff that you do that you might push a button or you might be able to engage with in a very limited way. Our intent with this sort of our renovation, with this challenge, is that we provide the opportunity for people to really explore and iterate multiple times, and a lot more open-ended. So broadly, we're trying to change that. But that brings a lot of funny challenges because those push buttons are super robust. The only thing that breaks is the button. And now when we start getting this perspective of saying we want open-ended challenges, allowing people to use, perhaps consumables and different materials, there's this consideration we have to make about how to make sure that it doesn't become such a burden for our maintenance and for our operations that we don't keep it up. And that's actually why we're doing this exploration with you guys and ourselves too, trying to think of like, how does this work? And what we've already started testing in that tech lab of saying, how does it work and how many consumables does it take? And we want to take it to the next level of actually looking at the kind of exhibits that wouldn't require facilitation. In the tech lab, it has facilitation and allows us to make it safe because there's a person there, make sure too many consumables aren't taken because there's a person there. And we want to figure out, like, how would we do similar sorts of controls without the human oversight?
Mm-hmm.
That was rambling, so I'm not sure that I caught your.
It was absolutely fabulous. So in terms of like theft and such, is that a big problem that you worry about a lot?
It's not something that's been a real big problem, not one that we particularly, that I would put too much attention to. If we had, very expensive hand drills for something that are desirable and small, we'd be careful about how we put them out there. But most of the stuff, when we put consumables out there and/or tools, really we haven't had that trouble. I mean, we have relatively portable 3D printers and pretty high-end ones. You could take them, but they have not been taken, nor have any of our more expensive materials. So we're not too concerned about that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we have a question in from Team 4043, the Nerd Herd. They're wondering what kind of energy constraints there are.
That's a good question. I think it should be assumed that you can use electricity, and we would just have 110 volts, so standard volts available with regular 3-prong outlets. You can assume that that's there. And in terms of draw, if you want to get very specific about that, I wouldn't think that you'd want to have anything over 20 amps going through it, because that would mean that we would have to pull new circuits and make it a little bit more complicated. But all of our circuits there would be at least 20 amp circuits. And so that's a good expectation. But if you wanted to think of other kind of energy stuff, it is an enclosed hall, so solar is not really very useful. Hydrothermal is not very useful. So there are some limitations. I think probably electricity is the most reasonable one.
And smoke is probably something you'd rather not have generated in
It's
there.
something we'd rather not have generated regularly, but it shouldn't be too hard a constraint because we have done and we do things that use heat, such as 3D printers and other things in hot glue. So you can use things that create heat, but not something that would require open flames.
All right. Our next question is, what should we have in our booth on Sunday?
Well, from the rules committee standpoint, you want whatever you think will make the best case for your project proposal. That could be just a laptop and a CAD, or it could be laptop and a CAD and a scale model and a working prototype and a finished exhibit that you're going to hand to OMSI the next day. Most people aren't going to do that. What do you think you would look for in terms of something being compelling on Sunday?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. There's a lot of different ways that you can communicate, and I won't limit the perspective on this, but I do think that having both the designs developed in CAD and some of the more complex elements sort of probably tested and figured out in a prototype stage would be a good bet, because that's one of our processes. We'll often design either on napkin sketches or in CAD, but you really do have to test out those elements, and we usually prototype the whole thing. So the more that you can show the feasibility of your idea through a functioning prototype, even if it isn't an exact, fully functioning exhibit, would be helpful probably to the judges.
All right. Our next question comes from Team Swarm. I believe they're 957. Sorry if I'm wrong. They're wondering what age group they should focus on.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. A lot of people ask us about who comes to OMSI, and a simple way to think of it is that 50% of our audience are young and 50% are old. So it really does mean it's for everyone. The way that we often will talk about it is our core audiences are kids of ages 5 to 12 with their families, which range from folks who are in their teens, usually siblings, all the way up to grandparents who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. So it really is a giant range. What might be a useful thing for you guys to think about is it's okay, and I think it would be an okay way to start to think that the audience need to be literate. Not all of our audience is literate because we have a lot of young kids, but I think the complexity of your experiences, it would be okay that would require people to read. I think that's, we've sometimes done that when you don't have that requirement. It does make it requires you to be much simpler.
Mm-hmm. Does that mean that you probably want to limit the amount of text you're asking people to read? Is there like a rule of thumb on that?
We have a rule of thumb, which is trying to eliminate all the text. But depending on the type of activity, sometimes requires it. We, per panel, this is now gets really esoteric, is you don't want to have more than 120 words per panel. No one reads more than 120 words per panel. But functionally, it's really what's needed, and trying to limit it is a good thing, both for feasibility, but also in terms of innovation. It's harder. It's a harder challenge to help someone figure out how to do something without using words. Just like you were doing earlier for your Pictionary or charades. That's harder than just writing it out. So think of that as one of those things that would have points associated with it. The less need there is to explain, probably the more innovative the solution.
All right. Our next question is a clarification question. The CAD must be in Autodesk Inventor or Fusion. Is that correct? All right. That is correct. That was quick. Does anybody here have any questions? I'm not seeing any online right now.
So I know you talked a little bit about this, but maybe expand a little bit. So OMSI is getting away from the idea of just showing isolated, interesting phenomena and getting more engagement from a user. How much engagement is good? Obviously you could think it was great if somebody stayed in an exhibit for an hour, but I mean, what do you consider to be a pretty engaging exhibit?
Sherry, I'm going to give a more complicated answer than you probably expected. But we break down what we try to do in the halls into sort of 5 steps. And this just helps us make sure that we don't try and do too much with any one thing. And the 5 steps we have is we want to draw people over. Right? You need to get someone to care to then invest. And we call that attract. The next level is, and that one needn't keep someone for very long. It really just needs to get them over. Mm-hmm. We have this next step, and we care about the transfer between these stages. And the next step is curiosity. Like, I got you over. Now, do I have things that will draw you into that next level? And then the next level for us gets into understanding. And for me, what I'm looking for out of this group are things that are really getting to that next level, up to the understanding. And the other 2 levels that I don't expect you guys to focus too much on are action. And what we think about that is encouraging people to take action and invest independently on doing something, whether they would go on to school or they'd go join a FIRST robotics league or whatever it is that they'd be taking an action. And the last of our levels is leadership. And we consider all of these when we develop experiences and we decide where they're going to slot in. And in this case, we're really asking you guys to look at things in the curiosity and understanding level. And the success in those realms are, at a minimum of a couple minutes, and the engagements can go up to a half an hour.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right, our next question is from Team Swarm again. They are just on it tonight. They're wondering how handicap accessible these exhibits need to be.
Yeah, another good question. It's an important consideration for us to think of accessibility, but we don't think that every element that we have has to be universally accessible. So what we would ask that if there's a reason why there's a thing that you have in this that is not universally accessible, you want to have a good reason why not. In other words, that it cannot be. An example that we've done before is we had a tightrope walk. That was not universally accessible. We had a place where people who were unable to walk on the tightrope to experience some of the height and whatever else. So there was a parallel experience, not exactly the same, but that helped bring some of the elements of the experience to a broader audience. So that's kind of what we would usually expect if you can't make it universally accessible, is have some way to help the people who are excluded to engage, if not fully. What's that? Yep, that's what that's about. Yep.
So maybe you can give us some examples of what you think are fantastic exhibits at OMSI that are examples of the kinds of things you would hope these teams would create, and maybe an example or 2 of ones that you're not as happy with.
Sure. So I'll tell you guys my favorite exhibit at OMSI. And I mentioned it before when I made this funny gesture like this. It's the laminar flow table. We call it the float table. And really what it is just a fan blowing air up. But what the laminar flow does, it just, all the air is, it's not very chaotic air, so it's going pretty straight and it goes pretty fast. And that just means that you've created a tube of air. And I don't want to get into Reynolds numbers and all this stuff about fluid dynamics. But in a general sense, there's something neat about that because it means that it's not drawing the air next to it. It sort of cleaves off this air. So you can actually throw things across this laminar airflow and watch what happens. And it's sort of like a jet stream, and it's mimicking that. But one of the things that I've liked about it the most is that when we first did this, people were actually thinking of it as an airplane table. But the people who were using it started playing around and doing different things. And what we recognized was that people were actually playing games. And they were sort of hacking the system. And one of the games that we saw people playing, which was awesome, was that we had some, it actually wasn't part of the exhibit, we had Dixie cups at a water place, right? Where you could just get water. So those conical Dixie cups. And people started hacking those. And one of the games they were playing was, how can you get, with the laminar flow at one level, how can you get the Dixie cup to float and stay at the exact same level.
Hmm.
So it was this kind of funny design challenge that came out organically out of these people playing. And then we were like, awesome. And so now we have Dixie cups out there so everybody can do that. But I guess the point of that really was, and it was a part of the genesis of this idea of giving a challenge and then supporting it around it by saying, well, why is that, man? What's going on? What are the aspects? And then the science helps you understand and hopefully helps you solve that puzzle. If you really want to do that better than your brother, what do you need to know about this? Now, where we've expanded from that and where we want to go is that really didn't have, it's pretty cool watching how people organically played that game and developed those experiences, but it really didn't have any connection to anything else. It was just cool. I made
Cool
this thing stay, but there are connections, right? Whether it is, as I just mentioned, the jet stream, or if it's these other things. And what we really want to do is make it help people tie these experiences to things in the real world, but not in an esoteric sense, but in a way where they could actually, with this new knowledge, take action and doing something. So that's where we want to take it. So that's a good experience, open-ended, fun, well-used, and with simple materials.
Yeah, and also cheap.
Super cheap.
Yeah.
Now, an experience that I like, so I'm not gonna say I don't like this experience, but one that I wish we had an opportunity to expand is we have a water rocket there. It's actually one of the most loved things. It's a system that we developed, and it's very clever, allowing people to put air and water into a 2-liter bottle. And when they put the air and water in, it's the ratio that matters to shoot this bottle like a rocket up the top of up to the ceiling. And it's an optimization game where you're trying to optimize, like, what's the best ratio between water and air pressure is really what you're using. And so it's kind of neat, except you're just playing with these 2 variables. And again, there's no connection. And without really being able to really mess with it, I don't think that people get the connection, for one. And there's no problem solving. It's really, I'm optimizing something. And to what end? And it's really to optimize, right? And for us, what we want to shift, that optimization is something towards an end. And figuring out what those ends are, perhaps something more important than shooting it to the ceiling. That's what we're trying to foster through this shift to design thinking.
Mhm.
Well, in a curiously related question to what you were just talking about, Team 4043 is wondering if they have any height limits.
Aha. Yeah, they're really, yes, there's a height limit. Do not poke through our ceiling. But our ceiling is extremely high, and I'm sorry, I actually don't have the data, but my guess is it's 70 feet at the peak. So there's a lot of height there. And again, if there's a very good reason, we would even be willing to consider outdoor exhibits. So as to what was said earlier, is we'd prefer to have it inside, and prefer to have it in these square footages, but if it's like super rockingly awesome, we'll go outside and we'll do it.
And we have a question from a team that apparently wants to remain anonymous. I don't know, it's not that weird. They're wondering if they can use sand or Play-Doh.
Can they use sand or Play-Doh? There'd be no reason why they couldn't use either one. We have both of those as regular materials in the museum.
All right, that's all the questions I have for right now. Does anybody here want to ask anything?
Okay, well, this concludes our broadcast. So if you have rules, questions, and such, you can email them to robotics@catlin.edu. Some people may be wondering, gee, doesn't the Team 1540, because they organized this thing, have some sort of advantage? And no, we've been really, really careful to maintain a firewall between the people that were working on the rules and the people that are part of our LEAP team. And they're as surprised as you are right now in terms of what the rules are. So we have been very, very careful about that. So with that, thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you, Mon, for making all this thing happen. Thank you, Jacob. And thank you, Sydney, for the awesome, awesome video. And with that, we'll see you on Sunday.